Hello, friends. It is Shannon, and this will be a solo episode of the Thrive Forward podcast, which is always fun and a little bit weird for me to just talk into a screen as I'm recording this for you and not having a guest on the other end. But I would be remiss if I didn't join you as a solo episode this month as we're talking about resetting for the rest of the year. We've talked about mindset, emotions, obstacles, ways to repivot ourselves into the space that we need to. And let's talk about money, because let's be real, a lot of people set goals for themselves at the beginning of the year to be in a certain financial situation at the end of the year, whether that's saving, investing, paying down debt that you might have, getting a new job, increasing your income, making sure that your business is creating another revenue stream, whatever it might be. I want you to sit back for a moment and reflect. Where was it that you set those goals at the beginning of the year? What was the why behind it? You see, we always set these goals for ourselves, but if we really want to achieve them, we have to understand the why. What makes that goal possible for you? So for instance, if you want to achieve a certain savings goal, what is the goal behind it? Does that mean that if something happens that you'll be able to take care of and provide for yourself, for your family? If something, unforeseen were to happen, you were to lose a job or something like that. Or does it mean that you'll be able to go on that trip of a dream that you've always wanted to be able to do, or that you'll feel more fulfilled because you switched jobs? These are all things that we need to understand for ourselves before we hit those goals. What are your progress checkpoints? So you set that goal, but what do you need to do to get there? So often I see clients who are like, well, I want to do X, Y, Z. And for example, I want to have $1 million for retirement. When I hear often, well, that might not be enough for some people. It might be too much for some. It depends on your lifestyle. And I find so often that within finances, it used to be the water cooler that we listened to when we went actually into work. And there was a water cooler that everybody shared and filled up a cup from, which now after COVID probably isn't going to be something that we necessarily see so often. So what used to be the water cooler has now transitioned into social media or a Zoom event or being told by others what you might or should be doing with your money. There's so much that's happened this year from a financial standpoint so far. We've kind of seen like a steady increase in the market and now kind of a little bit of stagnation as we go into the mid part of the year. So what does that mean? We've heard buzzwords like cryptocurrency. We've experienced GameStop. And how are all of those things what we need to be doing? Well, you see, I sometimes go back to the basics with my clients. It's truly about what is the lifestyle that you envision for yourself? What do you want to be able to do? What are the non-negotiables for your life so that we can plan around you, not what everybody else is doing, but very specifically to you. I have some clients who need to save more than 6 figures every single year to be able to live a lifestyle that they want to. That's their thing. And I have some clients who only need to save 4 figures, or some clients who don't need to save anything at all anymore. In fact, they need to figure out how to spend it and have fun with it. So you see, we're all at different stages of where our life is when it comes to our finances. So money's personal. We don't just have one cookie cutter approach, or for that matter, one trending hashtag, or one piece of advice you hear over the water cooler. In fact, it's really important that we sit back and reflect and receive our own personal advice, not specifically trying to follow everyone else. You see, those individuals that are day traders or who are doing those different things on a regular basis, that's their job. They spend a lot of time doing that. That's not necessarily what is applicable for everyone. really, when it comes down to it, it's modern portfolio theory. 92% of your overall success in your portfolio and how you grow it, which is how we create sustainable wealth. Unfortunately, leaving it in your bank account isn't going to make you much return right now. So 92% of it is the investments that you choose, but how you are diversified. We call it, for fancy terms in our industry, because, we've got to make everything a little bit more complex with the words that we use. It's asset allocation. But how I explain that is different types of pie. You see, I love pie, and I like apple pie, cherry pie, rhubarb pie. I like mud pie. Yeah, I like the chocolate creamy stuff. All these different types of pie represent different asset classes in the market: stocks, bonds, emerging markets, real estate, private equity, all of these different things that we can be invested in within our portfolios. We want to know what the other part of your success is. So if 92% of that is really what your total return on your investment is, 2% is timing the market, 3% is specifically picking securities. So all those people that are out there that are like, oh, buy this and this stock because it's rising this much and blah, 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 blah. That's actually 3% of your overall success. And the other part, 3% luck. So the majority of your overall long distance return for the long run is 92% of how your portfolio is designed, or the different types of pie that you have in it. It's actually not the specific securities we're invested in. In fact, I encourage more from a specific security selection to be looking at the companies that are aligned with the missions that you want to be able to achieve in life. How do you want the money you have to be making impact in the world? That's where I look at the specific security selections for my clients. And of course, we want to understand how those companies are performing as well. But really, when it comes down to it, is how diversified are you? What kind of pie do you have in your portfolio? I could go on so many pie jokes, but I won't nerd you out in terms of financial jokes, because let's be honest, I'd like you to still be listening to this podcast by the end of it. That being said, when we think about like this mid-year checkpoint, we have heard so many buzzwords about all these different aspects. There are so many apps out there like Robinhood where you can buy stocks and sell them on your own, and how people are making money on a day-to-day basis. And I encourage all of that for you to be able to explore. I also want to make sure that you understand that you could lose that money too. So you're taking a big, crazy, wild bet on some things. And most people who are investors don't necessarily want to take a roller coaster ride with their money. There's a small population that does. Rather, more individuals, I'm hearing, really want financial stability and security. Now, that being said, I'm going to give you 3 different ways to look at that for you to see that for the rest of the year, rather than looking at it as a specific dollar amount goal. Again, I talked about this in December of last year. What is your why? And I'm going to give you kind of 3 ways to look at that and kind of check in with where you're at right now this year. So from a savings perspective, do you have that security blanket of an emergency savings fund? Most Americans, as of 2019, would have a hard time paying a $400 doctor bill. That's heartbreaking to me. And I do know that it is not possible for everyone to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Some people tell me, Shannon, you know what? I am literally just trying to scrape by so that I have enough money to keep a roof over my kid's head and food on the table. And so greatly do I respect you. And so wish that there were societal changes to be able to wish or make true that you don't have to struggle the way that you have to. And so I recognize that. And I want to make sure that I say that before I go into these next pieces, because I realize that there is a real struggle for many individuals. And I also want to be able to address for a lot of people who do have some level of flexibility. Even if it is a small amount every week that you're adding into savings, it's better than nothing. I do think it's worth the exercise to be able to look into your expenses, specifically your lifestyle. So often or not, when I'm working with clients, whether they are planning clients or investment wealth management clients, I start to see areas where maybe they're overspending because they didn't honestly realize it. Trust me, I get it. I go to Target and a couple of things end up in the cart that weren't supposed to. Who am I kidding? Nah, probably more than a couple. That being said, we need to understand what are the elements that we are spending money on. What are some of those things that we actually do really need? What are the things that are non-negotiables that we have to be able to preserve our mental health and well-being, our physical health and well-being? Those are things that we need to understand as a part of our life. But are there other areas that we can maybe cut back on? And I'm not talking about the fancy coffee trips to Starbucks, but if you are going every single day, you might want to think about not doing that just from a pure calories impact. But you're not going to become a millionaire just by cutting back on coffee. You're not going to get to where you want to be from a financial space without a level of discipline. So what I want you to be able to do is look through and maybe have a date with yourself every week to hold yourself accountable to understanding what goes in and what comes out. What goes into your bank account is your income. What do you get paid? And then what comes out? What are your expenses? What do you need to do? Before you swipe that credit card, before you swipe that debit card, before you pay that cash, do you need it? Is it something that you have to do? I often share this little trick that I do. I do some online shopping occasionally. And before I go through, I put everything into the cart and then I wait 24 hours to see if it's something that I actually really need. And sometimes I wait even longer than that. And sometimes I miss out on a sale. But 9 times out of 10, they're usually things that I don't really need. Amazon is famous for that, right? Those ads on Facebook or those ads on Instagram where they hear you talking about Zubas or whatever it might be. Now I'm going to get a ton of Zuba ads. Anyway, you don't necessarily need those things, right? Those are wants. So what are the things that we need that are non-negotiables in our lives? And maybe that for you is being able to go on a date once a week with your family or your significant other. Whatever it might look like, those non-negotiables need to be a part of your living expenses. From there, you calculate based on those non-negotiables and necessities, what do you need to have in your savings account? Because if something did happen to you, that level of a security occurs when you actually have money in a savings account. You see, security for so many and understanding that aspect of comfort is knowing that they have something to fall back on, knowing that there's an option out there. And yes, that is a luxury for some, but we need to be able to figure out if that's capable for us. And by going through the task of understanding what your non-negotiables and what your necessities are, you can figure out what do you need to have. If you do have fluctuating income, I do encourage you to have a longer term, probably 6 to 12 months of living expenses, because if you have a couple of down months, you're able to still pay yourself and still have that life that you want to be able to live. That being said, realistically, if you can get to 3 to 6 months of living expenses, that's where you can start to really look at more advanced options within your wealth planning. Until you have that, it doesn't mean that you can't do both and, right? I think that there's a lot of theories out there that like, Shannon, I have to pay off all of my debt before I start saving. When I work with clients who have debt that's out there, I usually work at an aspect of let's pay down the debt, but let's also save at the same time so that you don't end up in the same situation. Because a lot of times it's behavioral. Why we got in that debt is something that's happened in our life. We have emotional triggers that happen for us. We overwork ourselves. We don't have that mental stability and balance to reset ourselves. And so we end up spending money. And that that can cause us to tailspin into a debt situation that even if you pay it off, it can come back again. And so we've really got to address those types of behaviors before we move forward. And looking at our expenses and understanding those things also allows us to peel back the onion or lift up the carpet and see the cobwebs underneath so that we can better understand what do we need. And once you've established that savings account, you do have that level of security. So it gives you more options. Once you've paid down that debt, like once you have that savings account, you can pay down that debt even more aggressively. I'm a big believer of having both. And I don't think that you have to stop saving for retirement while you're doing those things. Even if you're saving for retirement and it's $20 a week or a pay period, whatever it might be, you're still doing it. A lot of times I hear individuals who come to me and they are like, Shannon, I don't know what I am not doing right when it comes to my finances. I just feel completely lost. So we start at that foundational space. And then once we get past that element of understanding our liquid savings and our nest egg and our security blanket, then we can move into those other complex situations, which would be, how do we protect what you've built? How do we save for the future? So those are the two other aspects. Let's address first that protection aspect. And I say protection loosely, right? Because there's not anything that is going to blanketly protect you from financial loss, especially if you are an investor. So it's really a gamble that you might take. It's just depending on how risk adverse or risk on you are in those situations. When I mean protection, I'm looking at it from an aspect of protecting yourself from those what ifs of life. What if something happens? My husband and I were just recently on our way back from a family vacation, and on our way home, he received some terrible news about a classmate of his in high school who he grew up playing hockey with, who was a great guy, and unfortunately was in a tragic car accident and ended up passing away. We can't always plan for things. I have had one of my girlfriends from high school whose husband passed away from cancer and her dad passed away from cancer in the same year. She had a miscarriage. So tragedy happens to us. Life events happen to us. We get laid off from our jobs. We need to be able to protect ourselves from those situations. So when I say protection, I use it in more of a loosely stated statement, right? Because again, we can't plan for everything. Life will sometimes hit us in between the eyes and surprise us in ways we never anticipated. But evaluating what your insurance coverage is. What's your health insurance? Do you have enough to cover your deductible? What would your out of pocket be? And that should be added to whatever your emergency savings is so that you make sure that you have that in case something were to happen to you. That emergency savings should be able to cover you from an expense standpoint for lifestyle, because a lot of those of you who work in corporate probably have a short-term disability policy that might not kick in for a period of time. And so you still will be responsible for covering some of those costs. And then after a certain period of time, it might not be covered. And for those of you that are entrepreneurs, if you don't have disability insurance, it's definitely something that you should consider. For instance, for those of you that are hairstylists out there or makeup artists, what happens if something happens to your hands? You're no longer able to do your job. So having disability insurance is something that is very critical for you, because if you can't do your job, you don't have income. And even if you have a nest egg, that's only going to cover you for a certain period of time. So looking at those pieces, as well as insurance evolves over the test of time, right? So perhaps you're a homeowner and you're younger. Well, you have a mortgage. And so looking at term insurance to be able to cover that or replace income or cover any educational expenses there might be for any children down the road, if potentially you were to pass on prematurely. We don't just look at life insurance as a simple replacement of paying off any debt. It's also, what do we want that lifestyle to be? And are we able to preserve that if something were to happen to either yourself or your partner? And then as we grow and evolve and change, there are many aspects of life where we might need other types of insurance. Going into retirement, how are you evaluating what Medicare options you have for yourself? How are you having those conversations of coverage for your doctors? Again, are you checking in and making sure that you are able to cover your deductible? And are you taking into account the aspect that you're probably going to have to pay out of pocket for eyeglasses or the dentist unless your insurance covers those types of things? Then going from there, as we look at the end of life, one of the biggest aspects that can get in our way is long-term care and needing to have that extended level of care at the end of our lives. And this is something that has been a very humbling experience for me as I watch my father go through his Alzheimer's battle. Long-term care can be very expensive, and insurance coverage might not actually cover everything that you need. But it could eliminate some of the tax liabilities that you have. It could protect some of the aspects that you have saved for so that you can still live out those experiences, whether it be with your partner or the generations after you. So looking into how are you planning for those what ifs? The next piece of all of that element of protection is making sure that you have the legal documents in order. These are all things that I'm telling you right now because you still have the capability of achieving these before the end of the year. You might not necessarily be able to hit your savings goal before the end of the year, but you can start to look at some of these options and understand what the cost might be for you and how close you are to your savings goal so that you can start working towards these elements. The legal part of things is not a napkin, right? We've talked about this on the podcast before. If you've listened to my episode with Brenna Galvin, we've talked about estate planning and the importance of making sure that you have a will, a power of attorney, and healthcare directive at minimum. Some of you might have more complex situations that require different elements of documentation. Perhaps you're a business owner and you need a buy-sell agreement. There are elements that maybe you have a child with special needs and you need a special needs trust to be able to spell out for them how they still benefit from your estate, but don't turn away any of the other benefits that they might be able to receive. Also, if you're planning on passing along generational wealth to be able to impact those after you, you also might want to be able to say, this is when they can receive that money or for these types of things. And that might mean that you need to establish a trust as well. There are lots of different things that these tools can be used for, but at bare minimum, especially if you are a parent, you should have a will. For instance, if you are a parent and you pass away prematurely before your children are of legal age, the state may get to decide who your children are in custody with or how your funds get allocated to them. So wouldn't you rather be the one that says who's getting your children and how those funds should be allocated? Providing a legal document is the space to be able to do that. And most attorneys can do that with a will and not have to have huge legal costs of establishing a trust. It's important to have a conversation with a specialist in this area. Attorneys all have specialties. You don't want to go to a heart surgeon for brain operation. That's the same way you don't want to go to a business attorney for estate planning, and you don't want to go to an estate planning attorney for business documents either. We want to use those individuals who specialize in those areas. And so when I think about the three things that you can really impact before the end of the year, I think about what is it that you can do to establish and work towards the progress of your savings goal? What is it that you can do from a protection standpoint for insurance and legal? And the last thing is to really understand and envision the long term. How are you saving to make an impact? Let's say an impact in your own life. I'm guessing you don't want to work forever. Maybe you do. Maybe you love your job. I love my job too, but that doesn't mean that at 70 years old, I want to keep working. Maybe I'll do it part-time. Maybe I'll be mentoring young advisors. What that looks like, I don't know yet, but I know for you, you probably need an element of savings in order to retire. Maybe you want to create a career pivot mid-career. Maybe you're 45, 50, you've done your corporate gig and you want to do something else. Well, you've got to be able to save for the long term too. So it's not just that immediate gratification of that emergency savings account. It's really, what do we need for the long term too? And there are so many different strategies on how you can save. Well, I'll talk to you about 3 different buckets that you want to make sure that you have for retirement. You want to make sure that you have something that's tax deferred. That kind of benefits you now, especially if you're a higher income earner. That allows you to lower your income tax bracket. Those are usually 401ks, 403bs. You don't want to miss out on matching funds that your employer might have. The second bucket is going to be tax-free. This is kind of like that bright, shiny bucket where you're putting money in that you already pay taxes on. So then it grows tax-free. And then when you take it out, it's tax-free as well. That is a bucket that isn't necessarily accessible directly by everyone, depending on your income tax bracket. So you do want to make sure that you work with a financial professional, whether it be your tax accountant, your CPA, a financial planner, a financial advisor, to be able to determine what are the best strategies for you. And then, of course, there is a taxable bucket. So tax deferred, tax-free, taxable. Taxable would be any income you receive in retirement, your Social Security, as well as any investments that might occur capital gains. So a lot of times people think I can only save for retirement in an IRA. And the reality is you can save in all 3 buckets. One might be a traditional IRA or a 401k. One might be a Roth IRA, and one might be an investment account where you could be susceptible to capital gains, but you have the ability to have what I call flexible dipping in retirement. It allows you to dip into whatever bucket you need for whatever goal it is that you're trying to achieve or whatever expense it is that you're wanting to be able to spend money on. I don't know about you, but every single client I work with wants to have some level of flexibility. So as you go into closing out this year, think about the things that are actually tangible for you. What can you do? Can you look at your cash flow more in depthly so that you can get closer to your savings goal? Stop ignoring your money. You're not going to achieve your savings goal by looking the other way. So you're going to have to look into your expenses and understand what do you need to be able to get to that space. Then anything above and beyond, how are you going to protect yourself? What insurance options are out there for you and what should you be doing? Do you have the right legal documents in play to make sure that you're protected in those situations? And lastly, how are you diversifying yourself to get to that space? Remember that 92% I talked about that everybody thinks is really the 3%? Yes, that 92% is really that level of diversification. That's how you create that wealth going forward. Really, it's not the sexy, flashy things. It's not luck. And it's not moving in and out of the market. It's how long do you want it to be there? And what kind of pie do you have? So as always, I want to be able to provide you different levels of education on the podcast, integrating different spaces of your life. But I thought it would be useful for us to take a stop and listen to ourselves and dig a little bit deeper when it comes to our finances. We are always willing to dig into that space with you on a personal level. And I always encourage you, even if it's not with us, to be digging into that personally as well. It is not our place here on the podcast to give blanket advice, but rather knowledge and abilities to think about things that you could bring to position to your financial advisor or your team. And if you don't have one, well, we are here and happy to help you. Just remember that relationship with your financial advisor is really critical. Understanding that somebody who values you and what you want to be able to do, who listens to you and who educates you. So if you need a change, we are also here to serve you in any capacity that we can help you. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast.